Cactus Range, a modest mountain range rising over a dynamic landscape in central Nevada, is where one important chapter in American history was closed. 190 miles north of Las Vegas, Cactus is part of the Nevada Test and Training Range managed by Nellis Air Force Base. This 3 million acre land block is the premier military fighter and bombing pilot training range in the nation. But during the early 1900s, hard rock miners searched this land for gold and silver. What was life like in the southern Great Basin deserts? Native Americans understood how to obtain scarce water and food, but the miners were from a different culture with contrasting skills. Who were these people? What type of hardships did they endure? And is there gold and silver just waiting to be discovered?
Many of them thought maybe tomorrow we'll hit the big one, we'll hit that vein and be on Easy Street.
There's really not much difference than feeling that you're going to make it on the slot machines than when you're going to find it out in the desert.
It's strange because a lot of other camps, the people that own the property will bring a company in, they'll trade the mine off, they'll go somewhere else, and the company will work. Here it was a family thing, and the family stayed here for 30 years or more.
He really felt very definitely that he had good ore and he would have a bonanza there.
Miners who ventured out to the Cactus Range would have to rely on resources from the neighboring boom towns of Tonopah or Goldfield. In the early 20th century, these towns experienced rapid growth by mining huge amounts of gold and silver. By 1907, Goldfield had a population of more than 30,000 people, and in its lifetime, the town generated nearly $84 million in revenue. Inspired by the wealth and promise of these towns, Cactus Range prospectors were convinced another bonanza was nearby.
I think people initially went out to the Cactus Range just because of the gold fever everyone had, and it was another likely spot for a discovery, and it was being advertised by promotion firms as the next new mining camp in central Nevada.
They were looking for burned red outcrops, silicious outcrops, similar to what they found in Goldfield, because that was their model. And then their other model, they were looking for quartz. Quartz was, from the Virginia City days, quartz was the thing that the prospectors looked for.
It had been a pretty active area, but it just shows you if once people have gold fever and you do see a little bit of mineralization, the rush is on. Not so much the boom, but the rush will be on, and Cactus area was a good example of that.
The United States Air Force is committed to scientific research and protection of its resources. In 2004, an archaeologist for Nellis Air Force Base located two women whose fathers conducted mining in Cactus Range. Their stories reveal their father's determination to follow their dream of mining riches, treks that took them through Goldfield to the Cactus Range.
We came first to Gold Point, and then we came into Goldfield, and then that's when my dad got interested in doing some mining.
James Curtis Thompson moved his family from Los Angeles to Goldfield in 1924.
The reason they moved to Goldfield was because of work. My father was a telegrapher in the Navy during World War I, and he got a job as station agent in Goldfield with the Tonopah Tidewater Railroad, and so the main reason was a job.
Thompson began prospecting 28 miles east of Goldfield and located claims in a mountain area known as Cactus Range. He believed the rock had great potential for gold, but his determination to mine valuable ore and provide a better life for his family proved to be physically difficult.
I would describe the life of a miner out at Cactus, and along with a lot of these other outlaying camps, as very, very harsh. and it took a certain breed of people to withstand that. But the gold fever was there, and many of them thought maybe tomorrow we'll hit the big one, we'll hit that vein and be on Easy Street. But that unfortunately never happened for the majority of them.
But James Thompson had faith in his claim, and in 1935 he decided to live on the Cactus Range and become a full-time miner.
This is the Thompson mine. The adit goes in back into the hillside to cut under the iron-stained ledge that you see up on the hill above us. That probably attracted the attention of the locator because of that iron-stained nature. It looks very similar to the Goldfield ledges.
In order to extract the ore, Thompson would have to engage in the arduous and expensive practice of hard rock mining. Placer mining, used in the streams of the California gold rush, required only two things: a washing device to separate gold from gravel, and water to accomplish the washing. Hard rock mining required breaking rock to extract ore. The ore then had to be crushed and ground, then treated in a mill to separate the valued mineral. As the working moved further underground, more equipment was required: steel rails, ore cars, hoisting machinery, pumps, air-driven drills, compressors, and timber. By the time Thompson settled into the Cactus area, the tools and machinery were readily available, but at a cost he could not afford. So he had to mine the old-fashioned way.
Their mining methods were hand methods. They weren't a lot more advanced than 100 years before that. They used hand steel. Actually, the drilling was by hand. They'd have a set of steels of various lengths, and the miner would sit there and hammer that with his hands.
He had no mechanized equipment. He used the good old drill and hammer. He had drills of different sizes. They were great big long iron drills, and he had sledgehammers, and he would put the drill up against the rock wall and just hammer away and then keep turning, and then he would put water, put a little water in the hole as it got going, keep turning it and hitting it. It was very hard work. I don't know how he did it all day long.
Many of the shafts at these outlying camps just hand-dug holes in an old hand-operated windlass to lower the bucket up and down to get the waste and possibly ore out if they found any. Compared here to Goldfield, you had the convenience of the high-tension power lines coming in, which thus electric hoists, the top-notch latest equipment. And the big companies here in Goldfield could afford that.
The conditions out here were very grim. That's why this area had not been developed. There's no reason to come out here. Once they got out here, they found that they were very isolated.
The isolation of Cactus Range made it difficult to raise children. Therefore, Jackie's mother kept a home in Goldfield so she and her sister Joy could attend school. On vacations, they would venture out to Cactus to spend time with their father.
I liked going out there because it was different, and to see my father, because he was so engrossed in the mine and there so much, we didn't see very much of him.
But what would happen if disaster were to strike? In the winter of 1937, the Thompsons would realize just how dangerous living in Cactus Range could be.
We went out to my father's mine for Christmas vacation, and Christmas Eve it started to snow. And we thought, isn't that wonderful? We're going to have snow for Christmas. Well, it kept snowing and snowing and snowing and blowing, and pretty soon the snow was practically even with the roof of our home. We were snowed in until February 14th. We had no radio, and we had no contact with the outside world. We didn't know what was going on elsewhere. This was just us. We ran out of fuel for the lamps, and so we went to bed at sundown because you couldn't see anything in the cabin. And then we'd get up at sunup, and there were great big bunk beds built in the back of the cabin. And Joy and I usually occupied the top bunk, and my mother and father the bottom one. But during this extreme cold, all four of us, with all our clothes and blankets we had, would be in one bed because we had to keep warm. We kept thinking that every day somebody was going to come and help us out. My father did want to walk out, and my mother and I, told him not to, because I can remember when he'd go out to look for rabbits, the crust of the snow would break and he'd be way up to his chest in snow. And so we knew that if he were to try to walk out, that he wouldn't make it. So he stayed because we actually forced him to stay. One reason that we hung in the way we did too, my parents were both very full of faith. They believed that we were getting out, we'd be okay. They were very positive people. And I think when you have positive parents, it rubs off on you.
Despite these adversities, Thompson continued to pursue his goal to strike it rich.
This silicified material is what you find underground. You can hear the silicification is the way that sounds. And it's got a lot of iron pyrite in it, which is, when it oxidizes, makes that rusty outcrop. And this is what contains the gold and silver. So if he found a big enough pot of this, he would have been excited.
I think what kept him going was he was so certain that the deposit was there and that he was on the track of it and that things were going to be entirely different. And I think that was his main motivation.
A prospector always has the thing that his next round is going to find the mother lode of the bonanza. And there was enough mineral in this thing that they did find enough to keep them interested.
One man who became interested was an entrepreneur by the name of Carl Fuchs, some 30 years earlier during the boom days of Goldfield.
Thinking of my father, I think that it was gold fever that brought him to the area. He would hear all the rumors. I mean, the men would come in and talk about where they had found a new claim.
Marguerite Fuchs Purcell, born in 1917, is the daughter of Carl Fuchs, a restaurateur who had come to Goldfield from San Francisco in 1906, just days after the April 18th earthquake. Carl sought opportunity in Goldfield, where the culture promised hope for those who desired a new start.
There's something about a mining town that is so different than other, farming communities or anything like that, because there were so many black sheep who made good.
Shortly after moving to Goldfield, Carl bought property and built the California Beer Hall. His brother Joe worked alongside him until he assumed ownership of the Santa Fe Saloon. Both were likely spots where the Fuchs brothers would hear tall tales from prospectors.
They would come from all over, and really not know what the desert was like. Being a bar, I think people would come to town and just maybe come in to get a drink. Well, they were looking so often for somebody to stake them, what they called staking them, because they would come with jewelry, they would come with other things, but they would want to turn that in and get money for that because they had to buy a donkey, or buy shovels and the food to go out. From the way he talked, it was sort of like a pawn shop, but it was foolish. They just didn't comprehend what it meant to be prospecting. But then you thought of Jim Butler, who founded Tonopah. He did it that way.
Life in these boom towns wasn't always easy. Some men let greed and desperation get the better of them. In many cases, they began to steal from the mines where they worked. The theft of raw ore, also known as high grading, had become a crime punishable by death.
One time, this miner came in, and he had worked in the mines for some time, and my father always felt he was really very honest, but maybe just this one time, picked up this piece of ore and knew he should get rid of it, so he asked my dad to just keep it for him and he would pick it up later. But then there was rumors going around that the owners were suspecting that there was a lot of high grading. So it became so bad that The owners sent inspectors in who looked like they were miners, but they were instructed that if they ever saw anybody high grading, that they should shoot him. So my father later found that the man who brought this into him was shot in the mine.
In 1908, Marguerite's father decided to invest in a mine nearly 30 miles east of Goldfield called the Golden Chariot.
Of all the areas in the Cactus Range, this one has the most potential to develop into a gold mine if one had the money to look for it.
Up and running by the end of 1908, the Golden Chariot and surrounding mines, the Mohawk Daisy and Last Chance, became part of what's known as the Jamestown District. Jamestown had a post office and its own newspaper. Prosperity seemed to define all of Carl's business ventures. But 12 years later, a national event would change his life forever.
When Prohibition was started, it just changed our life. I mean, it really did. And he was very proud of the fact that he wouldn't bootleg. He did try to make it for a while, just serving near beer, which they were allowed to make, and then of course sarsaparilla and a few other things, but it just wasn't going. Dad had been his own boss all those years, and it was a matter of his having to find work. I mean, who would hire him? His spirit was sort of crushed. It really was by that time.
Carl's belief that the mine would pay off carried him through this dark period. The mine was a vehicle in which he could salvage his spirit and provide for his family. But Carl would need to entice investors to further develop his mine.
He had taken men out there, and I think he was trying to interest them, you see, in maybe investing further in it.
What was going to cost you the money is going to be boring the hole. In other words, digging the shaft and proving the site. In other words, going down and following the mineralization to find out if there was a good strike.
Neighboring operations in Cactus included holdings by the Bailey family and Adolph Nair, who lived and mined within 2 miles of James Thompson. Merritt Bailey moved his wife and 2 daughters from Los Angeles to Cactus Range in 1928. He built his own home, the only one on the range with electricity, and 2 other buildings presumably used as boarding houses. Mr. Nair lived in a cove of 7 buildings, including his house, possibly all built by him. Records indicate he mined for 30 years, earning no money from his labor. Instead, he, like Bailey, unsuccessfully attempted to sell claims or holdings to investors. Nair hoped to sell his property to the Mining, Refining, and Smelting Company for $100,000.
They call him a specimen bug in one of the letters, which I thought was kind of interesting, which means he's the kind of guy that instead of giving him a sample with an average grade in his face, why he would go pick out the good stuff and have that assayed and give that to them so it looked good. So in a way, he was trying to perhaps overemphasize his property.
Cactus's topography did bear marginal resemblance to that of the Goldfield and Tonopah areas. However, without geological evidence of rich ore, the task of attracting investors to develop a claim was very difficult. The challenge required a primitive form of advertising.
You see piles like this all over the West around these little prospect holes, and we kind of informally refer to them as liar's piles. He picks out the best-looking stuff, and he develops an eye for what's good, and he piles it to the side of the prospect, so when he brings somebody in, he can say, this is what I've got here. This is my stuff. And you look at it, and you see a nice pile of mineral. And maybe it only represents a tiny portion of what came out of the vein, but it's a good way of seeing what the best mineral is in the area. It's a selling tool. It's the promotional pile for the prospector. That's what he's basing his hopes on.
Attempts to sell the property were also made in a joint effort. The neighbors were convinced that they were all mining along one large vein of gold and silver that deserved the attention of large-scale investments.
There is mineral indication here. There's nice vein structures. If you go up on the dumps, you can find galenas, fowlerite, copper sulfides, and they do contain precious metals.
The mine was profitable right towards the last. Dad made, I believe, 2 trips to the smelter out of Salt Lake City. He took several tons of ore and he cleared $50 a trip. And I believe he made 2 trips before he had to move off that property.
2 years before Merritt Bailey passed away, he received a final letter from the Refining, Mining, and Smelting Company. The letter firmly stated that the company had no intention of investing in the mine or sending anyone to inspect it in the near future.
It wasn't a scam. These people honestly thought they had something. They were trying to bring people in, but they weren't trying to work you. And people like Nair and Bailey probably were more serious. They actually thought they had something.
Unfortunately, the Cactus Range never produced the amount of gold and silver that the miners had dreamed of. The total sum of ore shipped from the Cactus Range area in 32 years could be produced from a single Tonopah or Goldfield mine in 1 day during the boom years. With no investors to bring the necessary equipment to the area, the metals could not be recovered at a rate that would yield life-changing profits.
There is no real evidence of a major ore body here. What you've got up there is a lot of smoke but no real fire. And an engineer would look at that and he'd say, well, there's nothing shown, there's nothing here that warrants my bringing a company in to put money in this.
Well, that was why Mother would get so upset, because he was still paying the taxes on that mine. That was one thing Dad stood firm on. That mine was going to pay off someday.
I think that what kept everyone going to stay there, the Nair and the Baileys, is the fact that they felt they were close to a bonanza, that they were willing to sacrifice in order to strike it rich. And I do think that's what the whole thing was about.
During World War II, the Department of Defense annexed 3 million acres in central Nevada to train fighter pilots. For safety and security reasons, access was restricted. But the mining operations and the homes remained protected.
I think the preservation work by the government out here is very good. They're to be commended. You know, the people think of a bombing range as a destructive place, but within this range, more things are being preserved than there are in the public lands outside the range, because they've got the area closed. People, you know, the general public sometimes is destructive, not all the time, but they can be. There are things left here, and looking specifically at the mining, there are mining artifacts and things lying here that you won't find in many other places in the state because they've all been packed off and put in people's backyards.
The work of taking place out at Cactus and its outlying camps is very, very beneficial for historians and for our future even. As a historian, I am really impressed and pleased that that is taking place. The petroglyphs, the remains of the old mining camps, had almost pristine condition, other than the natural collapsing and whatnot from age and all. But as long as it can be kept in a pristine condition as it is, I'm all for it and think they're doing an excellent job.
In 2004, Nellis Air Force Base granted access to both the Thompson and Fuchs families to visit their mines.
I can't even believe what's still in there because I thought it would all be collapsed.
Jackie Elder Thompson returned to her father's cabin for the first time in more than 60 years.
This was a little porch here, and we had a bed out here when we had company. That's what they got. And looking through the window here, you can see some remnants of it. There was a built-in table and benches, and over in that corner, right in there, you can see the stovepipe. It isn't the corner, the side wall. And then the amazing part to me, I can't even believe this, the bunk beds are intact and the springs are still there. That really is amazing.
Now, is that the bed that you all four had to sleep on while you were snowed in?
The bottom bed, ordinarily when we were out here, was occupied by my parents, and my sister and I used the upper bunk. But the year we were snowed out, it was so cold, we took all the bedding from both beds and we wore all our clothes, and the four of us slept in the bottom bunk to keep warm. And of course the stove was right there. And Dad would feed it for a while with, we started out to have wood. When we used all the wood up, well, then he went out and chopped Joshua trees that you see all over the place. And they are terrible fuel because they smoke, they moan, and they don't give off much heat. But it did take some chill off. And we had a table that was over in here, a little freestanding table, and Dad put a glass of water on it, and one night that water froze. It was that cold, to give you an idea, inside of the cabin.
Jackie's father made his final visit to his mine, the Thompson Claim, in 1956. Unfortunately, his dream was never fulfilled.
My father was very upset that he had to leave because he felt he was just on the edge of a really good vein. The gold was in quartz, and he had good quartz showing up. And he was very sorry that he had to leave because he did feel that there was money there to be had.
The Golden Chariot mine, now the Fuchs Nuclear Mine, is patented mining land and is still managed by the family today.
The only thing my father left, really, for us were the mines. He deeded them to my brother Joe and Carl in trust for the whole family. My only real recollection of the mines was when my mother and father would argue. And Mother kept saying, he shouldn't pay the taxes on the mine. He should be paying off his best friend's, the loan he had from Mike. And Dad always insisted he had to pay the taxes on that mine because someday it was going to pay off. I look at it now with all the casinos and everything, and it was a gambling, an addiction that they had that just always drove them a little bit further, a little bit further.
I feel that my mother was very relieved. I think that she loved California, and I think she always pictured going back to California, which we did not do. But I think she was relieved to get out of the Cactus Range. It was tough for her, too.
Did these miners exhaust all that the Cactus Range had to offer, or were they looking in the wrong places?
As far as there still being gold and silver to be found and discovered in the Cactus Range, I believe there could be. It's been proven more than one time here in central Nevada that what appears to be a dead mining camp or district turns out not to be so dead.
The miners who settled in the Cactus Range kept the American Western spirit alive by seeking out a better life for themselves and their families in an unfamiliar land. The hopes and convictions they were driven by embody the core of American ideals and still inspire people today. While the riches they so desperately searched for were never found, a fondness for the Cactus Range will always be with them.
Does it bring back a lot of memories being there?
It brings back a whole lot of memories, and I just very pleased that I had a chance to come and see it, and to see that the countryside hasn't changed one bit. The house did, but the rocks, the trees, the mountains, they're the same.